You ever seen someone get humiliated in front of 200 people in real time? Not the kind where someone gives a bad toast or a bridesmaid drinks too much. I'm talking about standing at the altar in a gown you spent 8 months designing, waiting for a man who is already posting his solo vacation on Instagram from an airport lounge. Yeah, that kind of humiliated. Welcome back to Midnight Romance. Like this video and comment where and when you're watching from. If you're new here, you need to hit that subscribe button right now because as good as this is, the next one will be even better. Now let's get into it. Kenna Ellis stood at the head of a sun-drenched vineyard in Napa Valley, and for exactly 60 seconds, her life was perfect. The kind of perfect that makes strangers on the internet believe in love. Her gown was champagne silk with hand-beaded constellations stitched into the train, her own design, 8 months of late nights and pricked fingers. Front row, her mother, Mama Darlene Ellis, a retired Army colonel, sat straight-backed and regal in royal blue, a single tear betraying the stone face. Beside her, Kenna's father, Malcolm, a retired high school principal, was already losing the battle with his composure, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief his own father had carried on his wedding day. Priya Okonkwo, Kenna's maid of honor and best friend since undergrad, stood at the altar beside her in blush pink, clutching a bouquet and sneaking glances down the aisle. Priya was the kind of friend who had drafted a 6-page maid of honor contract as a joke, and then quietly fulfilled every clause. She had taste-tested cakes, negotiated with a florist who tried to swap peonies for carnations, and personally called Brett 3 times the night before to make sure he had his cufflinks, his vows, and his spine. Solana Murrin, Kenna's younger cousin, sat in the third row, phone discreetly angled, ready to capture the first kiss for the family group chat. Solana was an influencer with about 400,000 followers, not the shallow kind, but the kind who had built a following by being genuinely funny and pathologically unable to mind her business. She had already posted 3 stories of the venue with captions like, "Cousin Kenna about to level up, groom better not fumble." The officiant smiled. The string quartet finished the processional. The breeze lifted the edges of the flower arrangements. And then silence. Not dramatic silence, not the pregnant pause before a groom's grand entrance, the kind of silence that starts to rot at the edges. 10 seconds passed, 20. Priya caught Kenna's eye and gave a tiny, confused head shake. Kenna's smile stayed glued in place, but her fingers tightened around her bouquet until her knuckles went pale. Brett's mother, a fretful woman named Celia who had spent the entire wedding planning process asking if the menu could be a little less ethnic, turned to her husband and hissed, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. "He was here an hour ago. He said he was getting air." He was getting air. Priya stepped back, shielded by her bouquet, and called Brett's phone, straight to voicemail, not the personalized voicemail she had heard a dozen times. The robotic one, the default greeting. She called again. Same result. Her stomach dropped into her heels. Then Solana stood up, and that was the moment the wedding died. Solana walked toward the altar on legs that felt borrowed. 200 heads turned. She was supposed to be the loud one, the messy one, the cousin who once accidentally crashed a funeral reception thinking it was a networking event. But right now her face was a mask of pure, devastating pity. She reached Kenna and turned her phone around. Brett's Instagram, posted 20 minutes ago from an airport lounge, a photo of a boarding pass, destination Bali, one way, the caption read, "Sometimes you have to choose yourself. New chapter, solo, airplane emoji." No mention of Kenna, no apology, no tag. Not even a private text to her phone while she stood there in his grandmother's borrowed veil. He had blocked her. He had blocked Priya. He had blocked Mama Darlene. He had methodically erased every direct line to the woman he was supposed to marry, and then he had announced his freedom to the world from a departure gate, sipping a latte, while the string quartet played the song she had chosen for their first dance. The comments were already flooding in, friends tagging each other, strangers chiming in with popcorn emojis, a cousin from Kenna's side typing, "Wait, isn't the wedding right now?" Before quickly deleting it, but not quickly enough. Screenshots were already spreading. The humiliation was not just happening in that vineyard. It was happening everywhere to everyone forever. Mama Darlene rose from her seat, not dramatically, slowly, deliberately. The way a general rises before issuing an irreversible order. She walked to the front, took the phone from Solana, looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and handed it back. Then she turned to the guests. Her voice, trained by decades of command, filled the space without a microphone. "The ceremony will not be taking place. There will be no reception. My family thanks you for your time. Please exit in an orderly fashion." No one argued with Mama Darlene Ellis, ever. The guests departed in a rustle of shock and whispers and hastily silenced ringtones. Priya was already on her phone, messaging Brett's best man, a perpetually nervous man named Derek, who she had once watched sweat through a linen blazer in an air-conditioned room. His replies came in fragments of panic and guilt. Brett had been telling his law firm colleagues for weeks, telling them that Kenna was too much, too ambitious, too loud, that he wanted a simpler wife, a quieter wife, a wife who didn't design whole worlds in her head and then demand to build them. Derek had assumed Brett had broken it off. He had not realized Brett had simply opted out without telling anyone. Kenna had not spoken, had not cried, had not moved. She stood at the altar, gripping her bouquet, staring at the empty archway where Brett should have been, and the only sound she could hear was her own heartbeat and the faint buzz of 200 phones delivering her disaster to the world. Then her father reached her. Malcolm Ellis had spent 30 years counseling teenagers through broken hearts, failed exams, and the careless cruelty of adolescence. He knew when words would help and when they would wound. This was a silence moment. He held his daughter the way he had held her when she was 6 and scraped her knee, when she was 16 and lost her first love, when she was 22 and got her first rejection letter from a design house. Each time, she had eventually stood back up. But this time her body was limp, a marionette with cut strings. "Daddy," she whispered, voice raw and tiny. "He made me a fool in front of everyone I love." Malcolm's arms tightened. His voice, when it came, was steady and soft, the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime teaching young people that their worst moment did not define their sum total. "No, baby. He showed everyone exactly who he is. Now you show them who you are." Kenna didn't believe him yet. Standing in the ruins of a day that was supposed to be her beginning, she could not see past the wreckage. But somewhere behind the tears, behind the shock, behind the weight of 200 pitying stares, there was an ember. It would take months. It would take her mother's tough love and her cousin's relentless optimism and her best friend's fierce loyalty. It would take a spilled drink at an art tech exhibit and a quiet Korean man who noticed a bracelet she had almost thrown away. It would take a comeback so massive that Brett Huxley's name would become a footnote, a cautionary tale, a punchline at dinner parties he would never be invited to. But all of that was still ahead. For now, there was only a woman who had been erased, standing in the wreckage of her own wedding, held up by a father who refused to let her fall. And somewhere in Bali, a mediocre man boarded a plane, genuinely believing he had just chosen himself. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. 6 months after the vineyard, Kenna Ellis was a ghost of herself. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a forgettable part of the city, the kind of building where the elevator always smelled faintly of someone else's dinner, and the hallway lights flickered but never quite died. Her days had collapsed into a gray routine. Wake up at 4:30 in the morning, pull on black clothes that required no thought, walk to the coffee shop where she worked as a barista, her hands moving through muscle memory while her mind stayed blank and far away. Finish that shift, Walked to the dry cleaner where she worked alterations in the back, hemming other people's trousers, repairing other people's zippers, smoothing out the wrinkles in other people's lives. Go home. Stare at the ceiling. Repeat. The sketches that once covered every surface of her apartment were piled in a corner now, face down, gathering dust. Half-finished designs for smart fabrics and illuminated gowns, ideas that had once kept her awake with excitement, sat abandoned. Her plants had died. She hadn't noticed until Solana pointed it out, and even then she just shrugged. What was the point of watering something just so it could keep living? Priya came by every Tuesday and Thursday without fail, letting herself in with the spare key. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she just sat on the couch and worked on her laptop, filling the silence with the quiet clack of keys, a human presence asking nothing. She had learned not to push. The first few months she had pushed. Come out for drinks. Talk to me. You can't just rot in here. Kenna had responded with blankness so complete it scared her. So Priya stopped pushing and started simply being there. Tuesdays and Thursdays, reliable as a heartbeat. Solana took the opposite approach. She showed up unannounced with loud energy and aggressive optimism, throwing open curtains, talking a mile a minute about her influencer drama, trying to provoke a reaction, any reaction. Cousin, you designed gowns for people you have never met and made them feel beautiful. Get up. Get up right now. I am not leaving until you say something mean to me. Kenna rarely did, but Solana kept coming anyway. The truth was, Kenna wasn't just heartbroken. Heartbreak she could have understood. Heartbreak was clean. This was something murkier and more corrosive. Brett hadn't just left her. He had made her question whether she had ever been worth staying for. He had stood in front of colleagues and friends for weeks, explaining her away like a problem he was solving. Too ambitious, too loud, too much. And the worst part, the part that gnawed at her at 3 in the morning when the ceiling became a screen for every insecurity she had ever had, was that some small, wounded part of her believed him. Maybe she was too much. Maybe being fully herself meant being unlovable. Maybe the price of being Kenna Ellis was ending up alone. She was drowning in these thoughts one Thursday evening when she heard a key in the lock, and then a voice that cut through the fog like a blade. Kenna Renee Ellis. Not Priya, not Solana. Mama Darlene. Kenna sat up on the couch, genuinely startled. Her mother lived in Atlanta. She did not make surprise visits. She planned everything 2 months in advance and sent itineraries with bullet points. And yet here she was, standing in the doorway in a camel-colored trench coat, a small suitcase behind her, looking at the disaster zone of her daughter's apartment with the calm, assessing gaze of a woman who had survived 2 tour of duty and 3 office politics wars, and had yet to meet a problem she could not dismantle with strategy and sheer force of will. She did not ask permission to enter. She walked in, set down her suitcase, and opened all the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, exposing every dust mote, every dead plant, every unopened envelope. Mama, what are you doing here? Mama Darlene turned to face her daughter. Priya called me. She said you've stopped fighting. She said the light went out. I told her I raised a woman who does not let a mediocre man with weak character define her finish line. So I'm here to remind you of that fact. Kenna looked away. Mama, you don't understand what he did. It's not just that he left, it's how he left. He told people I was too much, for weeks. He planned his escape while I was doing seating arrangements. He didn't even think I deserved a conversation. Mama Darlene crossed the room and sat down on the couch, not beside her daughter but directly in front of her, blocking the view of the television, the window, anything that might let Kenna escape the moment. Her voice was quieter now, the command stripped away, leaving only the mother. I know what he did, and I know it was cruel, but here's what I also know. You are not the first woman to be told she's too much, and you will not be the last. The world tells women like us that we are too much because the world is not enough. Brett Huxley is not enough. He never was, And the tragedy here is not that he left. The tragedy is that you have spent 6 months letting his opinion become your opinion. Kenna's chin trembled. What if he was right? Mama Darlene reached out and gripped her daughter's hand with a strength that felt like an anchor. Then you get up and you prove him wrong, but you do not get to lie here and rot. I did not raise you for this. Your father did not hold you up in that vineyard for this. Now you will shower, you will eat the food I brought, and then you will sit with me and tell me one dream you still have. Just one. I am not asking. It was the command, not the comfort, that cracked something open. Kenna had been swimming in sympathy for 6 months. Priya's gentle presence, Solana's aggressive cheer, her father's soft, worried voice on the phone. But her mother offered none of that. Her mother offered expectation. And somewhere underneath the grief and the shame, Kenna remembered that she had once been a woman who rose to expectations. She showered, she ate, and then she sat across from her mother at the small kitchen table and said quietly, I still see designs in my head, Mama, late at night. I can see the thread paths and the circuit integrations. I know how to make fabric that breathes with the person wearing it. But what's the point? Who's going to take me seriously after what happened? Everyone saw. Mama Darling leaned forward. The point is those designs are still in your head, which means you are not done. I don't care who saw what. The people who matter will care about what you build, not what you survived. 2 weeks later, Priya and Solana executed what they called Operation Get Kenna Outside. It was a small art tech exhibit downtown, the kind of event where graduate students displayed experimental projects and industry people wandered through pretending they weren't scouting talent. Low stakes, low pressure. Kenna agreed to go mostly to get them to stop asking. She wore a simple black dress and a bracelet she had almost thrown away during her spiral, a scrap piece she had woven years ago from conductive thread and reclaimed silk, a prototype for a flexible textile circuit she had never finished. She didn't know why she put it on. Maybe because her mother had told her to remember who she was. Maybe because the bracelet was proof that she had once been someone who made things. The exhibit was modest, held in a converted warehouse with concrete floors and string lights. Priya stayed close, narrating the artwork with increasingly ridiculous commentary to make Kenna smile. Solana flitted around, networking aggressively, shooting her shot with a nervous installation artist. For a moment, Kenna almost felt normal. Almost. Then a man backed into her and spilled his drink on her wrist. The liquid was cold, some kind of sparkling water, and she flinched more from surprise than discomfort. The man turned immediately, bowing slightly, already apologizing in softly accented English. He was not what she expected. Quiet suit, tired eyes, a face that was handsome but not in a way that demanded attention. He looked like someone who had been working too long and sleeping too little, and his apology was so sincere and so formal that it felt almost out of place in the casual hum of the exhibit. I am so sorry. That was completely careless of me. Please let me. He produced a handkerchief, an actual cloth handkerchief, and gently dabbed at her wrist. And then he stopped. His hand hovered, his eyes, which had been politely apologetic, sharpened with something else entirely. This weave pattern, he said almost to himself. You have solved the signal continuity problem. Kenna blinked. What? He looked up at her, and for the first time he seemed to actually see her, not as a stranger he had inconvenienced, but as a person who had made something remarkable. Flexible textile circuits. The conductivity fails when the fabric stretches because the thread path breaks continuity. I have had an entire lab working on this for 18 months, and you have solved it. In a bracelet. Kenna stared at him. No one had spoken to her like this in 6 months. No one had treated her like a mind, a creator, a person with something valuable to offer. She had been Brett's discard. She had been Priya's project. She had been her mother's mission. But this stranger was looking at her like she was an answer to a question he had been asking for a very long time. Solana materialized at her elbow instantly, having sensed the interaction like a shark scenting blood. "She's a genius designer," Solana said, inserting herself with zero shame. "She just forgot it for a minute. Who are you?" The man straightened, tucking the handkerchief away, and produced a card from his jacket. It was simple, black text on cream stock: Ro Technologies, Ro Yi Sun, CEO. "I am hosting a private pitch session in 2 days," he said, speaking directly to Kenna now. "I am looking for a designer to lead a wearable technology line. Someone who makes art, not just products. If you have more work like this bracelet, I want to see it." Kenna opened her mouth to deflect, to explain that she had been out of the game for months, that she was a barista and a dry cleaner alterationist now, that she was not ready, that she might never be ready. But before she could speak, Yi-sun added, "No pressure. Just do not let this thread go dead." He nodded once, a small bow, and walked away into the crowd before she could respond. Solana grabbed Kenna's arm, eyes enormous. "Do you know who that is? Ro Yi-sun is like a mythical creature in tech. He doesn't do public appearances. He doesn't do pitch sessions. He just handed you a golden ticket and you almost said no. I saw your face. You were about to say no." Priya joined them, having witnessed the tail end of the exchange. Who was that man, and why does Solana look like she's about to levitate? Kenna looked down at the business card in her hand. The paper was thick, textured, expensive. The name was stamped, not printed. Someone had put thought into this card. Someone had put thought into everything, probably. She thought about her sketches piled in the corner of her apartment. She thought about her mother's voice. The point is, they're still in your head. She thought about Brett, somewhere in Bali or wherever he had wandered off to, still believing he had made the right choice, still believing she was too much. And something shifted, small, tectonic, irreversible. "His name is Ro Yi-sun," Kenna said quietly, "and I think I have 2 days to remember who I am." That night she called her mother. Then she called her father. Then she sat Priya and Solana down in her apartment, surrounded by the sketches she had finally pulled out of the corner and spread across every available surface. And she talked for 3 hours about conductive thread, organic LEDs, biometric responsive silk, and a vision that had been buried under 6 months of grief but had never actually died. Mama Darlene's voice came through the speakerphone, crisp and certain. "You asked me what the point was. Maybe that man just handed it to you. I don't believe in signs, Kenna. I believe in opportunities. This is an opportunity. Take it." Malcolm's voice was softer but no less certain. "Baby girl, you have been waiting your whole life for someone to see what you can do. That man saw it in a bracelet. Imagine what he'll see when you show him everything else." Priya, ever the attorney, was already strategizing. "I'll help you prep the pitch. No legal jargon, don't worry, but structure, packing, anticipating questions. You're not walking into that room unprepared." Solana grabbed Kenna's shoulders and shook her gently. "This is it, cousin. This is the moment in the movie where the sad music stops and the comeback anthem starts. Do not mess it up by being humble. Walk in there like you're the gift they've been waiting for, because you are." Kenna looked around the room. Her dead plants were still dead. Her apartment was still small and the elevator still smelled like other people's dinners. But the sketches were out. The bracelet was on her wrist. And somewhere inside her, the woman who had been left at an altar was slowly, quietly, making room for the woman who was about to walk into a boardroom and change her life. She didn't sleep that night. She worked, not for Yi-sun, not for her mother, not to prove Brett wrong. She worked because she had forgotten what it felt like to create, and now she couldn't remember why she had ever stopped. The Ro Technologies headquarters in Seoul was not what Kenna expected. She had prepared herself for cold minimalism, the kind of sleek glass and steel fortress that screamed money but said nothing else. Instead, the building was warm. Wood and stone and natural light. Art on the walls. Actual art, not corporate abstract blobs but carefully curated pieces from Korean and international artists. Somewhere in the lobby, Water was running over a stone installation, a quiet, meditative sound that made the space feel less like a corporate headquarters and more like a sanctuary for people who thought deeply about things. Kenna stood in the lobby, clutching a portfolio case that contained 2 years of abandoned sketches and 6 weeks of frantic, feverish new work. Priya had flown with her. She was seated now in a nearby cafe, ready to celebrate or console, depending on how the next hour unfolded. Solana had demanded real-time updates and had already blown up Kenna's phone with 17 messages, most of them variations on the theme of, "You are a goddess, act like it." The boardroom was on the 12th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River. A long table of dark wood sat 12 people, all of them important, all of them skeptical. Yi Sun was at the head of the table, not speaking, simply watching. He had not greeted her with any special warmth. A nod. A quiet welcome. Nothing that suggested he remembered the bracelet or the spilled drink or the strange, electric moment when he had looked at her wrist and seen something no one else had seen. Kenna stood at the opposite end of the table and set down her portfolio. Her hands trembled slightly. She did not try to hide it. She had learned in the past 6 weeks, working through the night, fueled by caffeine and a stubborn, rekindled fire, that fear was not the enemy. The enemy was letting fear convince you to stop. She was terrified. She was going to do it anyway. She opened with a single sentence. "Most wearable technology looks like technology. I want to make it look like magic." Then she showed them. She walked them through her vision. Luxury fashion embedded with organic LED threads so fine they felt like silk. Garments that responded to the wearer's biometrics, not in a clunky screen-on-your-wrist way, but in subtle shifts of color and light. A dress that glowed faintly warmer when your heart rate rose. A jacket that pulsed softly in time with your breathing. Not gadgets, not gimmicks, clothing that was alive, identity you could wear. She showed them her prototype. A simple black sleeve woven with conductive thread, so delicate it draped like liquid. When she connected it to a small power source hidden in the seam, the fabric bloomed with light, not garish or blinding, but gentle and organic like fireflies caught in silk. The board members who had begun the meeting with folded arms and polite skepticism were leaning forward now. One of them, a woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper questions, asked about durability. Kenna had an answer. Another asked about scalability. She had an answer. Another asked about cost per unit, manufacturing timelines, target demographics. She had answers for all of it. She had not come to this room to hope. She had come to this room to win. When the pitch ended, there was a long silence. The board members exchanged glances. The woman with the sharp cheekbones nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then all eyes turned to Yi Sun. He had not spoken during the entire presentation. He had watched her with an intensity that was unnerving, not because it was hostile, but because it was so completely undivided. He was not checking his phone. He was not glancing at his colleagues. He was looking at Kenna Ellis like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. Now he leaned forward slightly. "How long to deliver a full prototype line?" Kenna met his eyes. 6 months, with access to your lab and your materials." He nodded slowly. "You will have 8 months, and every resource you need." It was not a yes. It was better than a yes. It was a commitment. The board shuffled out. Kenna stood alone in the room for a moment, gripping the edge of the table, letting the reality of what had just happened settle over her. She had walked into that building a woman who had spent 6 months hemming other people's trousers and waking up at 4:30 to steam milk for strangers. She was walking out as the creative director of a collaborative line with one of the most influential technology companies in Asia. Her phone buzzed, Solana in all caps. "Well," Kenna typed back, "we got it." The response was a string of emojis, so long it crashed her messaging app. What followed was not a fairy tale, it was work. Kenna relocated to Seoul, a decision that terrified her parents and thrilled Priya and Solana. She moved into a modest apartment near the Rowe Technologies campus, a space she filled with fabric swatches and circuit boards and half-finished mannequins draped in glowing prototypes. She worked 14-hour days, sometimes more. She learned enough Korean to order food and thank her lab technicians and understand when someone was talking about her in the elevator. She collaborated with engineers who had never thought about fashion and pattern makers, who had never thought about technology, and she became the bridge between those worlds, translating art into code and code into art. Yi Sun was present through all of it, not hovering, not micromanaging, but present. He would appear in the lab late at night, holding 2 cups of tea, and sit quietly while she worked. Sometimes he asked questions about her process. Sometimes he shared stories about his own early days, the failures and false starts that had nearly broken him before his first breakthrough. He was reserved, almost formal, but there was a dry humor underneath that surfaced unexpectedly, and a way of listening that made her feel like every word she spoke mattered. Late one night, 3 months into the collaboration, they were alone in the lab. Kenna was troubleshooting a power distribution issue, muttering to herself, her hair escaping from a messy bun, her hands covered in conductive ink. Yi Sun was at a nearby workstation, reviewing schematics. Without looking up, he said, "You talk to your work when you think no one is listening." Kenna froze. "You heard that. I hear everything you say in this lab." He looked up, and there was something in his expression she had not seen before, a softness. "You tell the fabric it is almost there. You apologize to the circuits when they fail. You thank the thread when it holds." Kenna felt her face warm. "That's embarrassing." "It is not embarrassing. It is why you are going to change this industry." He paused and then added, almost too quietly, "It is why I cannot stop watching you work." The air in the room shifted. Kenna opened her mouth, but no words came. Yi Sun held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked back at his schematics as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had been happening for months, in the quiet hours and the shared tea, and the way he always seemed to be there when she needed a second pair of eyes or a word of encouragement, or just a silent presence that told her she was not alone in this massive, terrifying endeavor. They did not speak of it again that night. But Kenna went home and stared at her ceiling and realized, with a jolt that was half terror and half exhilaration, that she was falling in love with Yi Sun. The launch happened 2 years after that first boardroom pitch. The Kenna x collaborative line debuted at a gala in Seoul, a seamless fusion of high fashion and wearable technology that the industry had never seen before. Dresses that shifted color with the wearer's mood, jackets that glowed softly in the dark, powered by the body's own heat, accessories that monitored vitals and displayed them as subtle pulses of light. It was not just clothing. It was a new language. Kenna walked the red carpet in a gown of her own creation. Liquid silk black fabric off the shoulder, the skirt trailing behind her like spilled ink. Woven into the fabric were constellations of micro-LEDs that glowed faintly, shifting in response to her heartbeat. When she was calm, they were steady, a soft gold. When she was excited, they flickered faster, brighter, a living star map stitched into silk. The press called her a visionary. The fashion world called her a disruptor. The tech world called her a genius. Kenna Ellis, who had once been left at an altar in a vineyard in front of 200 people, was now the name on every magazine cover, every keynote stage, every red carpet that mattered. Yi Sun walked beside her, not as her boss, but as her partner. Their relationship had become public slowly, quietly, the way he did everything. No grand announcements. No staged paparazzi shots. Just 2 people who had fallen in love in a late-night lab, over tea and broken prototypes, and the shared obsession of making something that had never existed before. They were photographed constantly. At galas, at industry events, walking through the streets of Seoul, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. He never performed for the cameras. He simply existed beside her, steady and constant, and the way he looked at her when she spoke about her work said more than any caption ever could. The gala celebrating the Seoul flagship boutique was the biggest event of the year. Celebrities, investors, journalists, and industry titans packed the venue. Kenna stood near the center of the room, surrounded by people who wanted to congratulate her, photograph her, pitch her, partner with her. She was gracious and poised and utterly in her element. This was her kingdom now. She had built it from nothing, from less than nothing, from the ashes of a day that should have destroyed her. And then a commotion near the entrance. Security was escorting someone out. A man. He was struggling, not violently, but desperately, his voice rising above the ambient hum of the party. Kenna, please, just one conversation. The crowd parted. The man stumbled forward, and Kenna saw his face clearly for the first time in over 2 years. Brett Huxley. He looked terrible. He had lost weight in all the wrong ways, his face gaunt, his expensive suit slightly too big like it had been purchased for a version of him that no longer existed. His hair was thinning. His eyes were frantic, rimmed with red. He looked like a man who had been running from something and had finally run out of road. Kenna, please, his voice cracked. Just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. The room was starring. Phones were rising. This was going to be everywhere within minutes, and Kenna knew it. She also knew she had a choice. She could have security drag him out. She could ignore him and let the crowd swallow the moment. But something made her raise her hand. She signaled security to pause. Then she walked toward Brett, her gown trailing behind her, the constellations on her skirt pulsing with the steady, controlled rhythm of her heart. 5 minutes, she said. Her voice was calm. She was surprised by how calm. Say what you came to say. Brett's face crumpled with a relief that was almost pathetic. I panicked. I was a coward, I know that. I've known it every single day since I got on that plane. His voice was shaking. My firm passed me over for partner. My friends stopped returning my calls. My Bali photos got me nothing but a few likes and a very expensive loneliness. I threw away everything that mattered because I was scared. I was scared of you, Kenna, scared of how big you were, how bright. I told myself I wanted simpler, but the truth is I wanted smaller because I was too small to stand next to you. I know I destroyed us, but I need to know. Is there a version of this where we talk, just talk? Kenna looked at him. She remembered the vineyard, the silence where he should have been, the boarding pass on Instagram. The weeks of telling colleagues she was too much, too loud, too ambitious. She remembered her father holding her up because she could not hold herself. She remembered 6 months of dead plants and unwatered dreams and a ceiling she stared at every night, replaying the moment her life collapsed. And she felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction, just a clean, quiet nothing. The absence of pain where pain used to live. You didn't destroy us, Brett, she said. There was no us. You made sure of that. I've built a life that doesn't need your apology to feel whole. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a presence materialized at Kenna's side. Yi-sun. He had not been summoned. He had simply appeared the way he always did when she needed him, whether she realized she needed him or not. He did not look at Brett with anger or contempt. He looked at Brett the way you look at a stranger who has accidentally wandered into the wrong room, mildly curious, completely unconcerned. He spoke only to Kenna. The Japanese investors are ready, shall we? Kenna took his arm. She did not look back at Brett. She walked across the room, into the crowd of people who had come to celebrate her, leaving behind the man who had erased her and finding only silence where his memory used to live. Behind her, security closed in, and Brett Huxley was escorted out of the building, out of the spotlight, out of her story. Later that night, Kenna and Yi-sun stood on a private balcony overlooking the Seoul skyline. The city glittered below them, a river of lights winding through the darkness. The gala was still humming inside, but out here it was quiet. Just the two of them and the distant sound of traffic and the cool night air. Yi-sun was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I watched you tell that man you did not need his apology. You meant it. I did mean it. Kenna leaned against the railing. I didn't know I meant it until the words came out of my mouth, but I meant every syllable. That is when I knew, Yi-sun said. She turned to look at him. Knew what? He did not answer with words. Instead, he reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. Not the dramatic on-one-knee gesture, just a quiet offering held between them. He opened it. Inside was a ring, not a diamond solitaire winking under the city lights. It was a band of platinum, simple and elegant, inlaid with a thin strip of the same conductive thread she had used in her very first bracelet, sealed under clear resin so it would never fray, never break, never go dead. Ro Yi-sun, Kenna whispered, half laughing, half crying. Did you put my own prototype in an engagement ring? I watched you tell that man you didn't need his apology. He repeated. And I realized I want to spend my life being the man who never makes you need one from me. So, yes, I put your prototype in a ring. Marry me, Kenna Ellis. She kissed him instead of answering, which was, she figured, answer enough. The ring fit perfectly. He had measured it somehow, probably while she was asleep on the lab couch after a 16-hour workday, which was both romantic and slightly creepy and entirely in character for the man who had once reverse-engineered a bracelet she had almost thrown in the trash. She held her hand up to the city lights, watching the thread gleam faintly, the tiny circuit still alive under its resin seal, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. From a vineyard in Napa Valley, abandoned and erased, to a balcony in Seoul, chosen and seen. Kenna Ellis had made the ultimate comeback, and this was only the beginning. The engagement dinner was small, private, and perfect. Yi-sun rented out the top floor of a traditional Hanok restaurant in Bukshan, a place where the walls were paper and wood, and the courtyard garden was visible through sliding doors. It was not the kind of venue that made headlines. It was the kind of venue that made memories. Kenna's parents flew in from Atlanta. Priya came from New York. Solana arrived with a suitcase full of outfits and a live-stream rig she was strictly forbidden from using. Mama Darlene embraced Yi-sun with the formal respect of one general acknowledging another. Then she pulled him aside and spoke to him for 10 minutes in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. When they returned, Yi-sun looked slightly pale but composed, the way a man looks after receiving a very thorough and very loving threat. Malcolm shook his hand warmly and told him about the first time Kenna had sewn a dress, age 7, using her mother's good curtains. She's been building things her whole life. Malcolm said, You take care of the first man who gets to build with her. Priya gave a toast that was equal parts heartfelt and legally binding. Solana cried so hard her false lashes detached and floated in her champagne glass. It was the kind of night that Kenna would remember for the rest of her life, surrounded by everyone she loved, anchored to a man who had never once made her feel like too much. When the dinner ended and the families dispersed into the cool Seoul night, Kenna stood on the restaurant's wooden terrace, looking out at the tiled rooftops and the distant glow of the city. Yi-sun came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty, it was full. She was happy. For the first time since the vineyard, she was truly, unguardedly happy. The letter arrived 3 days later. Kenna was at her studio in the Rowe Technologies building, working on sketches for the next collection, when an assistant brought in a stack of mail. Most of it was the usual: industry invitations, press clippings, a handwritten note from a young designer in Lagos who said Kenna's work had inspired her to pursue fashion tech. That one made Kenna pause and smile. Then she opened the last envelope. It was heavy cream paper, expensive, the kind of stationery that costs more per sheet than most people spend on a meal. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, precise. No return address, no postmark. It had been hand-delivered. The message was short. You don't belong beside him. I spent 7 years building what you stole in 2. Leave quietly, or I will make your departure permanent. Take the. Kenna read it 3 times. The first time with confusion. The second time with a cold, creeping dread. The third time with a very specific, very focused stillness that she had not felt since the moment Solana turned her phone around at the altar. The stillness of a woman who had been threatened before, not with words but with absence, and who had learned that the only way to face a threat was to look at it directly. She called Yi Sun. He was in a meeting. She told his assistant it was urgent. He arrived at her studio 15 minutes later, slightly out of breath, which for a man as composed as Yi Sun was the equivalent of screaming panic. She handed him the letter. He read it. His face did something Kenna had never seen before. It drained of color first, then hardened into an expression that was not anger. It was colder than anger. It was the look of a man who had been expecting a storm and had just seen the first clouds gather on the horizon. "Sorry, take the," he said quietly. Kenna sat down. "Tell me everything." And he did. Sora Takeda was the daughter of a Japanese real estate magnate and a mother who came from old, quiet money with even older, quieter connections. The Takeda family was legitimate on the surface. Billion-dollar developments, political ties, philanthropy that made the society pages. But beneath the surface, Sora's maternal uncle, Isamu Takeda, was an oyabun, a high-ranking leader in one of Japan's most powerful Yakuza syndicates. The kind of man who did not appear in news articles. The kind of man who solved problems with a phone call and a whisper, and when necessary, with violence that was never traced back to him. Yi Sun had met Sora nearly a decade ago, when Ro Technologies was still a startup, and he was a young founder looking for investors. She was brilliant, magnetic, and deeply possessive. Their relationship lasted 7 years on and off, a cycle of intensity and manipulation that Yi Sun had been too young and too ambitious to recognize for what it was. She saw him as an acquisition. He saw her, eventually, as a cage. The end came when Yi Sun discovered that a rival executive, a man who had been publicly critical of Sora at a tech conference, had been the victim of a violent home invasion. Nothing was stolen, but the man's hands were broken, both of them methodically. His wife found him on the kitchen floor. The police never made an arrest. The case went cold, but Yi Sun found a trail, faint but undeniable, that led back to Sora's uncle. When he confronted Sora, she did not deny it. She smiled and said, "He should not have spoken about me that way." Yi Sun ended the relationship within a week. He changed his security. He changed his habits. He built a dossier of everything he knew about Sora's connections, her uncle's operations, the whispers and the threats and the crimes that never made headlines. He kept it as insurance, knowing that one day she would resurface. Because women like Sora Takeda did not let go. They regrouped. And now she was here. "She's been watching us." Kenna said. It was not a question. "Yes." Yi Sun sat beside her, his voice calm but his jaw tight. "The letter was hand-delivered to your studio. She knows where you work. She probably knows where we live. She has been waiting, Kenna, waiting for me to be happy so she could take it." The escalation came quickly. Solana was in Seoul visiting, staying at a hotel in Myeongdong, when 2 men in plainclothes approached her on a busy shopping street. They were polite, impeccably dressed. One of them handed her a phone with a live video call already connected. On the screen was a woman with sharp cheekbones and a cold, beautiful smile, sitting in what looked like a traditional Japanese tea room, sunlight filtering through paper screens. "You must be Solana," the woman said. "Kenna's charming cousin. I've watched your content, you're very funny." Solana, for once in her life, was speechless. "Tell your cousin this was a courtesy." The woman continued. "The next message will not be delivered to a friend. It will be news coverage she will not walk away from. She has 72 hours to leave Seoul and disappear from Yi Sun's life permanently. After that, I will not be so gentle." She tilted her head slightly, as if admiring a piece of art. "Do you understand?" Solana nodded, her hands trembling, her phone still recording in her pocket because even terrified, she had instincts. The call ended. The men melted back into the crowd. Solana called Kenna from the floor of a nearby cafe bathroom, her voice shaking so hard she could barely get the words out. That same day, Priya called from New York. Someone had been inside her apartment. Nothing was taken. The lock was not broken. But on her pillow, perfectly centered, was a single white origami crane. The kind of crane that, in certain contexts, meant a warning. In other contexts, it meant a funeral. Priya's voice was steady, because Priya was always steady, but there was an edge to it. "I've already called the police. They're treating it as a break-in. I didn't tell them about the crane. I figured you'd want to know first." That night, Mama Darlene received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a male voice said, in accented English, "Your daughter is in danger. Leave Seoul, take your family and go." Then the line went dead. Mama Darlene called Kenna immediately. She did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She said, "I am coming to Seoul." Kenna told her not to. Mama Darlene said, "That was not a request." Yi Sun's penthouse became a fortress. His head of security, a stoic Korean man named Han who had spent 15 years with Interpol before retiring to the private sector, briefed them in the living room. The windows were bulletproof. The building had a panic room. A team of 6 rotated in 12-hour shifts, covering the entrances, monitoring surveillance feeds, coordinating with local authorities. But the real weapon was the dossier. Yi Sun had been compiling it for years. Every threat Sora had made, every whisper about her uncle's operations, financial records, witness statements, a detailed map of the syndicate's hierarchy. He had never used it because using it would mean starting a war he was not sure he could win. But now Sora had made the first move, and Yi Sun was done waiting. "I'm going to dismantle her," he said, sitting at the head of the dining table, the dossier spread out before him like a battle map. "Not just scare her, dismantle her, her family's legitimate businesses, her uncle's operations, every connection she has. I've been preparing for this since the day I left her. I just needed a reason to act." Kenna sat across from him. Her mother was on a plane. Her best friend had been violated. Her cousin had been threatened on a public street. And yet she felt beneath the fear a rising clarity. She had been erased once before. She had let a man make her feel small and disposable and powerless. She had spent 6 months in a grave of her own making, and she had clawed her way out with her own 2 hands. She was not going back. "She wants me to run," Kenna said. "She thinks I'm Brett. She thinks I'll tuck my tail and disappear because things got hard, but I am not Brett, and I am not running." Solana, still pale but recovering her spark, looked up from her phone. "I got footage of the men who approached me. Not their faces, but their shoes, their watches, the way they moved. I'm an influencer, cousin. I notice details. If Han can use any of it, it's his." Priya, on video call from New York, was already drafting a legal strategy. If Sora's family has legitimate businesses, they have vulnerabilities, shareholders, partners, people who would not want to be associated with organized crime. We find those people, we apply pressure. Mama Darlene, calling from the airport during a layover, said simply, "No one threatens my children. Tell Mr. Han I'll be there in 14 hours. I want a full briefing." Kenna looked around the room. Her family, her partner, the team that had assembled not because they were paid but because they loved her. She had spent so long believing she was too much. And yet here, in the middle of a crisis, her too much was exactly what was needed. She turned to Yi Sun. "What's our first move?" He looked at her, and there was something fierce and proud in his expression. We make her regret threatening my future wife. The final scene of that night found Sora Takeda kneeling in a pristine room of her family's estate outside Kyoto. The sliding doors were open to a moonlit garden. The air smelled of pine and incense. She wore a silk kimono in deep indigo, her hair pinned perfectly, her posture serene. On the low table before her was a photograph. Kenna and Yi-sun, captured by a telephoto lens, standing on the balcony of the Hanok restaurant, wrapped in each other's arms, the city glittering behind them. The moment of their engagement, the moment of their happiness. Her uncle, Isamu Takeda, entered without knocking. He was a weathered man in his 60s, his face unreadable, his presence heavy with decades of unquestioned authority. He looked at the photograph. He looked at his niece. "The Korean is mobilizing," he said. "His security team is making moves. Quiet moves. He's not running, he's preparing." Sora did not look up, and the woman, still in Seoul, her family is flying in. They are not running either. Sora's smile was slow and cold. She picked up the photograph and studied it, tilting it slightly so the moonlight caught the glow of Kenna's engagement ring. Then she ran a single lacquered fingernail across Kenna's face, leaving a crease in the glossy paper. "Good," she said. "I prefer when they fight." She set the photograph down. The silence in the room was absolute. "It makes the ending more memorable." This is the end of part 1. Here's the question you need to sit with until part 2 drops. Sora Takeda spent 7 years waiting for this moment. She has resources Kenna can't imagine and a family network that has been operating in the shadows for generations. But Kenna Ellis survived being publicly erased, rebuilt herself from nothing, and now has a billionaire fiancé with a dossier and a security team, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Who is more dangerous? The woman who was born into power, or the woman who had to fight her way back from the grave to claim it? And the bigger question, now that Sora knows Kenna isn't running, what do you think her next move is? Because she said she prefers when they fight. That means she planned for this. So what haven't we seen yet? Drop your theories in the comments. I want to know who you think is making it out of part 2 alive. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? This is a 2-parter and part 2 is going to be a war. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments what you would do if you had 72 hours and a Yakuza heiress threatening everyone you love. I'll see you in part 2.